The emergency room floor was slick with a terrifying mixture of blood and rain, the air thick with the metallic scent of copper and ozone. Nurse Abigail Collins had just pulled 20 people back from the absolute brink of death in under 2 hours, orchestrating a symphony of survival amidst deafening chaos. She was exhausted, her blue scrubs stained dark, her hands trembling slightly as the final crash cart was wheeled away. That's when the automatic double doors swung open, not with another stretcher, but with 3 men in tactical windbreakers. The lead FBI agent bypassed the chief of medicine, locked eyes with Abigail, and said the words that shattered her carefully constructed life. "Stand down, Major." The fluorescent lights of Portland General Hospital's emergency department had a way of washing the life out of everyone's faces by 2 a.m., but Abigail Collins always looked strangely at home in the artificial glare. At 34, Abby was the kind of nurse who commanded the floor without ever raising her voice. She had transferred to Portland General 2 years ago with a spotless resume, glowing generic recommendations, and a distinct lack of personal history. She didn't have Facebook. She didn't join the staff for post-shift drinks at O'Houlihan's. And she never spoke about her family. To the rest of the staff, she was a quiet, hyper-competent enigma. Dr. Samuel Peterson, the attending chief of trauma, often joked that Abby had ice water in her veins. Peterson was a 20-year veteran of emergency medicine, a man who had seen his fair share of tragedy, but even he deferred to Abby's instincts. When a patient's blood pressure started dropping before the monitors even registered an alarm, it was usually Abby who was already pushing a line of epinephrine. It was a Tuesday night in late November. The Pacific Northwest rain was lashing against the reinforced glass of the ER lobby, a relentless drumbeat that usually promised a slow night. The board was manageable. A teenager with a suspected appendicitis in Bay 4, a homeless man sleeping off a rough night in Bay 7, and a middle-aged woman with a fractured wrist in Bay 2. "Quiet night," murmured Chloe Bennett, a junior nurse, barely a year out of school, as she leaned against the nurse's station counter. She took a sip of lukewarm coffee. Almost too quiet. Abby didn't look up from the chart she was updating. "Don't say the Q word, Chloe. The universe has a terrible sense of humor." Her voice was calm, almost melodic, but her eyes, a piercing, storm-glass gray, were constantly scanning the room. She noticed the slight tremor in the teenager's hand in Bay 4. She registered the breathing pattern of the man in Bay 7. It was an involuntary habit, a constant threat assessment that she couldn't turn off, no matter how hard she tried. "I'm just saying," Chloe sighed, tapping her pen. "I wouldn't mind a little action. A good trauma keeps the blood pumping." Abby finally stopped writing. She looked at Chloe, a shadow passing over her features. "You don't want action, Chloe. Action means somebody is having the worst day of their life. We are here for when the worst happens, but we don't pray for it." Before Chloe could apologize for her flippancy, the floor beneath their feet vibrated. It wasn't an earthquake. It lacked the rolling sensation. This was a sharp, violent jolt that rattled the medical instruments on their metal trays and flickered the overhead lights. A split second later, a low, concussive boom echoed through the city, reverberating against the hospital walls. Dr. Peterson stepped out of the break room, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand, his brow furrowed. Was that a transformer blowing? The red emergency phone on the main desk, the hotline directly linked to county dispatch, began to ring. Its shrill tone cut through the sudden silence of the ER like a knife. Abby picked it up. She didn't say hello. "Portland General, go." The voice on the other end was frantic, breathless. "Mass casualty incident. Structural collapse and secondary explosions at the Hawthorne Industrial Complex. At least 40 critical en route. ETA is 3 minutes. I repeat, 3 minutes." Abby slammed the receiver down. The quiet, unassuming nurse vanished. In her place stood someone entirely different. "Code Black," Abby announced, her voice slicing through the room with absolute, undeniable authority. "Peterson, clear all non-criticals to the waiting room. Chloe, Get the trauma bays prepped. Bring every crash cart we have to the hallway. Page every surgeon on call. Wake up the residents and get the blood bank on the line. Now, Dr. Peterson blinked, momentarily taken aback by the command tone from his subordinate. But the urgency in her eyes left no room for debate. The universe had just delivered its punchline. 3 minutes later, the double doors blew open, and hell walked into Portland General. The paramedics rushed in, their bright yellow jackets smeared with soot and blood. The first stretcher held a man whose chest was completely crushed by a steel beam. The second held a woman with severe, weeping burns covering her upper body. Then came a third, a fourth, a fifth. Gas main underneath the manufacturing floor went up, shouted paramedic Mike Rossi over the agonizing screams of the wounded, brought down the whole south wing. We've got crush injuries, massive burns, shrapnel. It's a slaughterhouse out there. The ER, designed to handle perhaps 5 simultaneous severe traumas, was instantly overwhelmed. There were too many bodies, too much blood, and not enough hands. The noise was deafening, alarms blaring, people screaming, metal clattering. Dr. Peterson was at Bay 1, desperately trying to intubate the crush victim, his hands slipping on the blood pooling in the man's throat. A second-year resident, Dr. Eris Thorne, froze completely in the center of the room, staring in horror at a young worker with a severed femoral artery pumping bright red blood onto the linoleum. The system was breaking down. People were going to die simply because they couldn't be seen fast enough. Abby stepped into the center of the chaos. She didn't panic. Her heart rate barely elevated. She had been in places far worse than this, under skies that rained actual fire. "Listen to me," Abby shouted, her voice carrying a terrifying, metallic edge that demanded immediate obedience. "Triage rules are in effect. If they are black-tagged, move past them. We focus on the salvageable." "Eris," the young resident jumped. "Stop staring, and put your knee into that man's groin. Now, compress the artery against the bone or he dies in 60 seconds, Abby ordered, physically shoving the doctor toward the bleeding patient. She grabbed a black Sharpie and a roll of red triage tape. She became a blur of calculated motion, moving from stretcher to stretcher on the floor. Patient 1. Bilateral femur fractures. Stable airway. Red tag. Chloe, get 2 large bore IVs and hang saline. Patient 2. Agonal breathing. Massive cranial trauma. Exposed gray matter. Black tag. Move him to the hall. Give him morphine if we have it. But do not waste a doctor on him. Abby, I can't get an airway, Dr. Peterson yelled from Bay 1, his voice tinged with panic. His jaws shattered. Abby abandoned her triage line and sprinted to the bay. She didn't ask for permission. She grabbed a scalpel from the tray. "Cricothyrotomy," she said flatly. Before Peterson could process the shift, Abby had sliced a precise, bloodless vertical incision into the man's neck, bypassed the shattered jaw, punctured the cricothyroid membrane, and slid a breathing tube directly into his trachea. She attached the bag and squeezed. The man's chest rose. "Tape it," she commanded Peterson, already turning away. For the next 2 hours, Abigail Collins waged a one-woman war against death. She bypassed standard hospital protocols, relying on raw, battlefield medicine. When they ran out of commercial tourniquets, she used blood pressure cuffs and hemostats. When a patient's lung collapsed from a shrapnel wound and no doctor was free, she jammed a 1-4 gauge needle into the man's chest herself, listening for the hiss of escaping air that signaled he wouldn't suffocate. She was everywhere at once. She caught a missed internal bleed by the sheer pallor of a woman's skin. She manually pumped a teenager's heart from the outside when the defibrillator failed to charge. She barked orders, pushed medications, and physically held the line between the living and the dead. By 1:45 a.m., the frantic influx had stopped. The surgical suites upstairs were full, and the ER floor looked like a war zone. Discarded wrappers, bloody gauze, and shattered glass littered the ground. 20 critical patients. 20 lives that should have been lost to the sheer mathematics of the disaster. All 20 had been stabilized and sent upstairs. The only casualties were the 4 who had arrived, already gone. Abby leaned against the wall near the decontamination showers. Her arms were covered in blood up to her elbows. Her hair had fallen out of its tight bun, plastered to her forehead with sweat. She took a slow, deep breath, feeling the adrenaline begin to crash, replaced by a bone-deep ache. "Doctor." Peterson walked over to her, looking entirely shell-shocked. He looked at her hands, then at her face. "I've never seen anything like that," Peterson whispered. "The crick, the chest tube, the way you commanded the room. You saved 20 people tonight, Abby. I don't know where you learned to operate like that, but you're a miracle." "Just doing my job, Sam," she replied softly, avoiding his gaze. She walked over to the deep sink to scrub the blood from her skin. As the hot water ran over her hands, the automatic double doors at the entrance of the ER hissed open. There were no sirens this time, no paramedics. 3 men walked in. They wore dark suits beneath tactical windbreakers. The letters FBI were printed in stark yellow on their backs. They moved with military precision, their eyes scanning the room, ignoring the exhausted medical staff. The lead agent, a tall man with a severe buzz cut and a jagged scar across his chin, bypassed the security desk. He walked past Dr. Peterson, ignoring the doctor's protests about restricted access. He stopped 5 feet from the sink where Abby was washing her hands. Abby turned off the water. She didn't reach for a towel. She just let the pink-tinged water drip from her fingertips. She didn't look surprised. In fact, her shoulders slumped slightly, as if she had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. The agent reached into his jacket, pulled out a leather wallet, and flipped it open to reveal a gold shield. "Special Agent Robert Trent," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the ER. He didn't look at Peterson. He didn't look at the blood on the floor. He locked eyes with the nurse. "Stand down, Major," Trent said. "Your cover is blown. We need to talk about what really caused that explosion." The silence in the emergency room was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that only follows a period of extreme, deafening trauma. Dr. Samuel Peterson stood paralyzed, his eyes darting between the exhausted nurse he thought he knew and the towering federal agent who had just called her Major. "I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, Doctor," Peterson finally sputtered, stepping between Abigail and Special Agent Trent. "But this woman just pulled off a medical miracle. She has been on her feet for 12 hours. Whatever jurisdictional dispute you have, it can wait." Agent Trent didn't even blink. He reached out with a massive, calloused hand and gently but firmly moved the chief of trauma aside. "Dr. Peterson, your dedication to your staff is commendable," Trent said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that left no room for argument. "But the woman you know as Nurse Collins isn't who you think she is. And right now, she is the only person in this building equipped to understand what is about to happen. Miller, secure the doors. Nobody in or out." A younger agent, sharply dressed but with eyes as cold as Trent's, nodded and moved to the ER entrance, resting his hand casually over the bulge of his holstered sidearm. Abby slowly grabbed a paper towel. She dried her hands, feeling the familiar, icy calm of her previous life washing over her. The 2 years of playing the quiet, unassuming civilian were evaporating into the sterile hospital air. She tossed the paper towel into the biohazard bin. "Conference room B is empty," Abby said, her voice dropping the soft, melodic tone she used with patients. It was now clipped, precise, and flat. "We can talk there." She didn't wait for Trent's approval. She walked past him, leading the way down the linoleum corridor to a windowless, administrative room. Trent followed, signaling his third agent to remain at the nurse's station. Once inside, Abby hit the lights and sat at the far end of the long mahogany table. Trent sat opposite her, dropping a thick, manila folder onto the polished wood. "You look tired, Major," Trent noted. pulling up a chair. "I prefer Abigail now, Trent," she replied, leaning back and crossing her arms. "And I was perfectly awake until you decided to crash my shift. How did you find me?" "The DoD promised me a blind file." Trent opened the folder. Inside were satellite photographs, classified military service records, and a heavily redacted after-action report from a mission in Damascus. "The Department of Defense keeps its promises, Major. But when 30 pounds of highly classified military-grade cyclotrimethylene trinitramine RDX explosives detonates in the middle of an American city, the FBI gets to open blind files," Trent explained, sliding a photo across the table. Abby looked at the image. It showed the Hawthorne Industrial Complex, but not the manufacturing floor the local news thought it was. It showed a subterranean bunker beneath the factory, its reinforced steel doors blown outward off their hinges. "I read your file when the algorithm flagged a facial recognition hit on a traffic camera outside this hospital 6 months ago," Trent continued. "Major Abigail Collins, United States Army Special Operations Command, commander of a forward resuscitative surgical detachment attached to JSOC. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 3 classified deployments to Syria. You spent your career keeping Tier 1 operators alive in the worst combat zones on Earth." Trent leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Then, 2 years ago, you vanished. Honorable discharge, sealed records, and a quiet job in Portland. Why?" Abby stared at the photograph of the blown bunker. She knew exactly what RDX blast patterns looked like. The Hawthorne explosion wasn't a gas main. It was a shaped charge. "Because I saw something I shouldn't have," Abby said quietly, deciding candor was her only play. "During an extraction in Aleppo, my team recovered a laptop from a black market arms dealer. It contained shipping manifests for restricted chemical catalysts, stuff used to make next-generation thermobaric weapons. The buyer wasn't a foreign cell. It was a domestic defense contractor based in the Pacific Northwest. Kenward Heavy Industries." Trent's eyebrows raised slightly. "You blew the whistle." "I tried," Abby corrected bitterly. "I took it to my commanding officer. 3 days later, my surgical tent was hit by friendly fire. I lost 2 medics. I barely made it out. Someone high up the chain was protecting Kenward. So, I made a deal with military intelligence. I hand over the drive, they bury my identity, and I get to disappear." Trent tapped the photograph of the Hawthorne facility. "Well, Major, I have bad news. The Hawthorne Industrial Complex is a shell corporation. It's owned by Kenward Heavy Industries. They've been using it as an off-the-books synthesis lab, and tonight, somebody hit it." Abby felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "You're telling me that mass casualty event, the 20 people I just pulled back from the brink, that was collateral damage?" "It was a distraction," Trent confirmed grimly. "The local fire department thinks it was a ruptured gas main because the initial blast ignited the factory's propane tanks. But my bomb squad found the chemical signature of military C4 at the epicenter. This was a highly coordinated heist. A heavily armed tactical team breached the subterranean lab and stole 4 canisters of an experimental, highly volatile binary liquid explosive." Abby's mind raced, processing the tactical variables. If they wanted to steal it quietly, why level the building and cause a mass casualty incident? "Because," Trent said softly, "they didn't want us locking down the city grid. They needed the chaos. They needed every police officer, fire truck, and federal agent rushing to the burning building while they slipped away in the confusion." Trent stood up and began pacing the small room. "But they made a mistake. Our preliminary surveillance of the site shows that one of the lab technicians, a civilian chemist named Arthur Vance, managed to trigger a localized lockdown in the vault before the thieves could secure the final canister. The thieves shot him, breached the vault, and took the asset. But Vance didn't die in the blast." Abby froze. Her heart skipped a beat as her photographic memory cycled through the faces of the 20 bloody patients she had just treated. "Patient 7, Abby whispered, the blood draining from her face. Excuse me? Trent stopped pacing. A middle-aged man, second-degree burns, massive blunt force trauma to the chest, and multiple deep lacerations, Abby said, her voice accelerating as the horrific realization dawned on her. The paramedic said it was shrapnel from the gas main explosion. I dug 3 pieces of metal out of his shoulder and chest before putting in a chest tube. She looked up at Trent, her gray eyes wide with alarm. It wasn't industrial steel, Trent. They were fragmented copper jackets. I thought it was just weird manufacturing debris, but they were bullets. Patient 7 was shot. Trent's demeanor shifted instantly from interrogator to field commander. He drew his radio from his belt. Miller, Sitrep. Lobby is secure, boss. Local PD is maintaining a perimeter outside due to the media circus. Agent Miller's voice crackled over the radio. Trent, Abby interrupted, her military training overriding her exhaustion. If Arthur Vance is the only witness who saw the thieves, and he survived the explosion, then they know he's a loose end, Trent finished for her, his jaw clenching. Abby stood up, slamming her hands on the mahogany table. The paramedics who brought him in. I didn't recognize them. We work with Portland Fire and Rescue every night. I know the crews. I know Mike Rossi and his partner. But the crew that wheeled in Patient 7. She closed her eyes, visualizing the chaotic scene from an hour ago. The yellow jackets, the soot-stained faces. They were wearing standard-issue turnout gear, but their boots, they were wearing Salomon tactical boots. Paramedics wear heavy steel-toe station boots. Trent cursed under his breath. He keyed his radio again. Hayes, check the ambulance bays. Find the rig that brought in the chest trauma victim. A tense 10 seconds passed. Then, Agent Hayes responded, his voice tight. Boss, I'm in the bay. Ambulance 42 is here. But the crew is missing. And, damn it, boss, the real paramedics are in the back, bound and gagged. They've been stripped of their turnout gear. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They used the mass casualty protocol as a Trojan horse, Abby said, the reality of the situation clicking into horrifying focus. They knew Vance would be brought to the nearest Level 1 trauma center. They infiltrated the chaotic transport to ensure he didn't wake up and talk. How many men? Trent asked. 2 brought him in, Abby recalled instantly. 1 stayed near the doors. I assumed he was managing the triage tag flow. That means there are at least 3 heavily armed, highly trained mercenaries currently inside this hospital, disguised as first responders. Where is Vance right now? Trent demanded, drawing his sidearm and checking the chamber. ICU recovery. 3rd floor, Abby replied, already moving toward the door. He was stabilized, but he's heavily sedated. He's a sitting duck. Stay here, Major. This is an active shooter situation now. You are unarmed and compromised, Trent ordered, stepping in front of her. Abby glared at him. The nurse entirely gone, replaced by the JSOC commander, who had survived ambushes in the Syrian desert. With all due respect, Agent Trent, this is my hospital, Abby fired back, her tone lethal. I know the blind spots in the security cameras. I know the service elevators that don't require key cards. If you try to move your team up the main stairwells, they will spot you and turn this entire facility into a hostage situation. You need me to navigate. Trent studied her for a fraction of a second. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the look of a soldier who had already calculated the risks and accepted them. Fine, Trent conceded. But you stay behind my vest. Do you understand? Understood, Abby lied. They exited the conference room, moving swiftly back into the ER. Dr. Peterson was still at the nurse's station, arguing with Agent Miller. Sam, Abby called out sharply. Peterson turned, looking relieved to see her. I need you to initiate Code Silver, silent alarm, lock down the ER doors, shut off the elevators to the public, and get the staff into the break room. Now, Code Silver? Peterson paled. Abby, that's an active shooter protocol. What is going on? Just do it, Sam. Trust me, she ordered. Abby led Trent to a heavy, unmarked fire door near the decontamination showers. Staff access. It leads directly to the medical supply dumbwaiter shaft and the maintenance stairs. We can bypass the second floor and come out right behind the third-floor ICU nurses' station. They moved into the dimly lit stairwell. The concrete walls echoed with the heavy thud of Trent's boots. Abby moved silently, her mind calculating the odds. 3 men, tactical training, heavily armed. They wouldn't just walk into the ICU and start shooting. They were professionals. They would try to make it look like a medical complication. They won't use guns, unless they have to, Abby whispered to Trent as they climbed the second flight of stairs. A gunshot draws too much attention. They're dressed as medics. They'll walk right into his room, push a lethal dose of potassium chloride into his IV, and walk out. It will look like a heart attack brought on by the trauma. How long do we have? Trent asked, breathing heavily. If they came up via the main elevators, after ditching the ambulance gear, they are probably already on the floor. They reached the heavy steel door labeled Level 3, Intensive Care. Abby slowly pushed the handle down, easing the door open just enough to peer through the crack. The ICU was quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of monitors and the dim hallway lights. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic ER below. Down the hall, standing outside Room 312 Arthur Vance's room, were 2 men. They were no longer wearing paramedic jackets. They wore dark blue hospital scrubs, easily stolen from a locker room. One man was keeping watch, pretending to read a chart. The other was standing in the doorway, a syringe in his gloved hand, preparing to enter the room. Room 312, Abby whispered to Trent. 2 tangos visible. The third is unaccounted for. I see them, Trent murmured, raising his weapon, preparing to breach the door. Suddenly, a cold, hard, metallic circle pressed against the base of Abby's skull from the darkness of the stairwell behind them. Drop the weapon, Federal, a voice hissed from the shadows. Or, the nurse's brains decorate the concrete. The third man had been waiting in the stairwell. They had walked right into a trap. The cold ring of the suppressor dug into the delicate skin, just below Abigail's occipital bone. The scent of CLP gun oil and stale sweat wafted from the man standing behind her in the dim, concrete stairwell. For a normal civilian, this would be the moment panic short-circuited the brain. But for Major Abigail Collins, the touch of a weapon was a switch flipping in a dark room. The exhausted emergency room nurse vanished entirely. Replaced by the apex predator, the Department of Defense had spent millions of dollars training. Slide the weapon across the concrete, Fed, the mercenary commanded, his voice a raspy whisper that barely echoed. Nice and slow. 2 fingers. Special Agent Trent froze. He was a veteran of the Bureau's hostage rescue team, but the geometry of the stairwell was entirely against him. If he twitched, the man would put a hollow-point bullet through Abby's brainstem. Trent's jaw clenched. He slowly pinched his Sig Sauer P-320 by the slide and lowered it toward the floor. Good, the mercenary breathed, pressing the barrel harder into Abby's neck. Now, kick it down the steps. Then get on your knees and interlace your fingers behind your head. Abby didn't move her head, but her eyes darted to the heavy, pneumatic fire door right beside her shoulder. It was reinforced steel, designed to contain a localized chemical fire, and it weighed nearly 200 pounds. She knew the tension on the hydraulic hinge was set incredibly high to ensure a perfect seal. Trent kicked his sidearm. It clattered down the concrete stairs, disappearing into the shadows of the second-floor landing. He slowly sank to his knees. Now, the mercenary hissed, adjusting his grip on Abby's shoulder to maneuver her as a human shield. We're going to step backward through this door. You make a sound. The nurse dies. You follow us. The nurse dies. He's making a mistake, Abby thought, her heart rate steadying into a cold, rhythmic cadence. He's assuming I'm a liability. He's assuming I'm soft. As the mercenary took his first step backward, reaching blindly with his left hand to pull the heavy fire door open, Abby initiated her counteroffensive. She didn't try to disarm him. She used the environment. The instant the mercenary pulled the heavy steel door open, pulling it toward himself and away from the latch, Abby dropped her weight entirely. She collapsed her knees, slipping out from under his grip like water. Simultaneously, she threw her entire body weight backward, driving her shoulder hard into the heavy steel door, slamming it violently in the opposite direction, straight into the mercenary's face. The sickening crunch of cartilage echoed in the tight space as the 200-pound door caught the man square on the bridge of his nose. He staggered backward, a muffled cry of pain escaping his lips, his grip on his weapon faltering for a fraction of a second. It was all Trent needed. The FBI agent lunged upward from his knees, like a coiled spring. He bypassed the flailing mercenary's weapon, driving his shoulder directly into the man's solar plexus and tackling him hard against the cinder block wall. The suppressed pistol clattered to the floor. Abby didn't waste time watching the brawl. She scrambled on her hands and knees, snatching the dropped weapon. She checked the chamber, a customized Glock 19 with a threaded barrel, and rose to her feet in one fluid motion, a lethal extension of her arm. Trent delivered a brutal, concluding elbow strike to the man's temple. The mercenary went limp, sliding down the wall. "Clear," Trent panted, shaking his bruised hand. He looked at Abby, his eyes widening slightly as he registered the flawless, textbook Weaver stance she had instantly adopted. The stolen Glock leveled perfectly at the doorway. "I told you," Abby whispered, her eyes devoid of warmth. "This is my hospital." "The other two," Trent warned, retrieving his own sidearm from the stairs below. They definitely heard the scuffle. Abby moved to the heavy door. She pushed it open just an inch. The ICU hallway was eerily silent. The two men who had been standing outside Arthur's room, room 312, were gone. "They breached the room," Abby deduced grimly. "They know we're coming. They're securing their objective." Trent keyed his radio. "Miller, Hayes, Code Silver is active. The third floor is a hot zone. Do not engage without heavy tactical support. We have suspects barricaded in intensive care, room 312, with a high-value target." Abby shook her head. "We don't have time for SWAT, Trent. The man with the syringe, he's not in there to negotiate. He's in there to induce a myocardial infarction. Potassium chloride acts in seconds. If he pushes that plunger into Arthur's the 4 line, the chemist is dead before your men even clear the lobby." "It's a fatal funnel, Abigail," Trent argued, gesturing to the hallway. "If we go through that primary door, we are walking into a crossfire. They will cut us down the second we clear the threshold." Abby turned away from the door, looking down the corridor at the layout she had walked 1,000 times on her midnight rounds. "Hospitals are designed for efficiency, Trent, not defense," Abby said, a dangerous glint in her gray eyes. "We don't use the front door." She pointed to the adjacent room, room 314. "Isolation rooms in this ward are built with shared, negative pressure anti-rooms to prevent cross-contamination. There's a sliding glass partition and a bypass door connecting 314 to 312. Nurses use it to monitor 2 critical patients at once without breaking the sterile field." Trent nodded, catching her drift. "A flanking maneuver." "Exactly," Abby said. "You take the primary hallway. Make noise. Draw their fire toward the main door of 312. I'll take the bypass through 314. You're a civilian now, Major. I can't let you." "I am the only one who knows the layout of that bypass," Abby interrupted, her voice a razor. "And I'm the only one who knows how to keep that chemist alive if they've already compromised his life support. Do you want to argue jurisdiction, or do you want to stop a domestic terror cell?" Trent stared at her for a microsecond. Then he racked the slide of his SIG. "On your mark, Major." Abby slipped into room 314. It was currently unoccupied. The bed stripped down to the mattress. The monitors powered down. The room was bathed in the pale blue light spilling from the street lamps outside the reinforced glass windows. She moved with absolute silence, her rubber-soled nursing clogs making no sound on the linoleum. She approached the adjoining wall. Embedded in the drywall was a wide, thick observation window, and beside it, a heavy, sliding wooden door on an aluminum track. Through the glass, she could see the nightmare unfolding in room 312. Arthur, the chemist who had survived the blast, lay unconscious on the hospital bed, a web of tubes and wires connecting him to a bank of life-saving machines. His chest rose and fell in a slow, mechanically assisted rhythm, powered by the ventilator in the corner. Standing near the door, his weapon trained on the hallway, was the larger of the two mercenaries. He was tense, waiting for Trent to make a move. Standing directly beside Arthur's bed was the second man. He had a 10cc syringe in his hand, the clear liquid inside reflecting the harsh glare of the overhead surgical light. He was calmly unscrewing the cap on Arthur's central venous catheter, a direct line to the man's heart. He's about to push the potassium, Abby realized. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed from the hallway. Trent had kicked over a massive, stainless steel crash cart, sending defibrillators, oxygen tanks, and medical supplies clattering violently across the floor. "Federal agents, drop your weapons," Trent's voice boomed, followed instantly by the sharp, concussive crack of his SIG firing 2 rounds into the reinforced doorframe of room 312. The mercenary guarding the door flinched, instinctively returning fire through the drywall, suppressing Trent's advance. The room filled with the acrid smoke of discharged cordite and a shower of white plaster dust. The man by the bed didn't even look up. He was a professional. He knew his job was the objective, not the firefight. He fitted the tip of the syringe into the central line hub. Abby didn't hesitate. She threw open the sliding bypass door, stepping from the dark anteroom directly into the chaotic glare of room 312. The man with the syringe caught the movement in his peripheral vision, but he was a fraction of a second too late. Abby didn't shoot. Firing a weapon with Arthur directly behind the target risked a fatal through-and-through shot, or worse, hitting an oxygen line and turning the room into a fireball. Instead, she relied on the brutal close-quarters combat she had perfected in the cramped confines of Black Hawk helicopters and Humvees. She closed the distance in 2 massive strides, leading with her left hand. She didn't strike the man. She struck the ivy pole. With a violent shove, she toppled the heavy, steel pole directly toward the mercenary. The pole crashed into his shoulder, disrupting his aim and tearing the central line free from Arthur's neck with a sickening, wet tearing sound. A geyser of dark venous blood immediately erupted from the chemist's jugular. The mercenary cursed, dropping the syringe of potassium chloride to the floor, where it shattered. He reached for his sidearm. Abby pivoted, using the momentum of her stride. Her right hand, still gripping the heavy Glock 19 by the barrel, swung in a tight, devastating arc. She used the steel grip of the pistol as a blunt force bludgeon, bringing it down with bone-shattering force against the mercenary's collarbone. The man dropped to his knees, a localized scream escaping his throat as his clavicle snapped. Abby immediately followed up with a ruthless knee strike to his jaw, snapping his head back and rendering him unconscious before he hit the linoleum. The first mercenary, realizing the threat was now behind him, spun away from the hallway door, raising his weapon toward Abby. But Trent was already moving. Capitalizing on the distraction, the FBI agent breached the primary doorway, diving into the room in a textbook tactical role. He came up on one knee and fired a single, deafening shot. The round caught the mercenary center mass. The man staggered backward, crashing into the glass window, before sliding to the floor, his weapon clattering harmlessly away. The firefight was over in less than 5 seconds, but the medical crisis had just begun. The blaring, high-pitched alarms of the physiological monitors suddenly pierced the ringing silence of the room. Arthur's blood pressure was plummeting into the abyss. The torn central line in his neck was hemorrhaging massively, pooling dark crimson across the pristine white sheets. Trent scrambled to his feet, kicking the weapons away from the downed men. He looked at the bed in horror. "Major, he's bleeding out." Abby dropped the gun. The JSOC operator vanished once more, replaced instantly by the trauma nurse, who had defied death 20 times that very night. Apply direct pressure to the neck. Now, Abby screamed at Trent, pointing to the geyser of blood. Trent hesitated for a second, then lunged forward, pressing both of his hands desperately over the torn jugular vein, his fingers slipping in the hot, slick blood. "It's not stopping," Trent yelled over the frantic shrill of the alarms. "He's lost too much." Abby was a blur of motion. She ignored the unconscious mercenaries. She ignored the shattered glass and the bullet holes. She threw open the sterile supply cabinets built into the wall. "He's going into hypovolemic shock," Abby said, her voice dropping into that terrifyingly calm, metallic register she used during mass casualties. "His peripheral veins are collapsing. I can't get an IV in to push fluids." "Then what do we do?" Trent demanded, watching the chemist's face turn a ghostly, translucent gray. Abby grabbed a bright yellow, pistol-shaped device from the emergency kit, an EZIO, intraosseous drill. "We go through the bone," Abby said flatly. She moved to Arthur's leg, ripping the blanket away to expose his tibia, just below the kneecap. She didn't bother with alcohol, swabs, or local anesthetics. There was no time. She aligned the thick, hollow core needle of the drill against the flat expanse of the shin bone. She pulled the trigger. The horrific, high-pitched whine of the medical drill filled the room, cutting through the beeping alarms as Abby drove the steel needle directly through the hard cortex of the chemist's bone and into the soft, vascular marrow beneath. "Line is in," she announced, popping the drill off and leaving the hub secured in the man's leg. She grabbed a liter bag of O-negative blood from the small emergency cooler at the nurse's station outside, sprinted back, and connected the tubing directly into the bone. She squeezed the bag manually, forcing the life-saving fluid into the marrow, where it would be instantly absorbed into the central circulation. "Keep the pressure on that neck, Trent," she ordered, her eyes locked on the monitor. "Don't you dare let up." For 2 agonizing minutes, the only sounds in the room were the labored hiss of the ventilator, the rhythmic compression of the blood bag in Abby's hands, and the ragged breathing of the FBI agent. Slowly, agonizingly, the numbers on the monitor began to climb. The terrifying red lines stabilized. The shrill alarm silenced, replaced by a steady, rhythmic beep. Arthur was holding on. Trent exhaled a long, shaky breath, his hands still clamped tightly to the chemist's neck. He looked across the bloody bed at Abby. Her scrubs were ruined. Her face was streaked with plaster dust and blood. But her hands were completely steady. She had just fought a tactical room-clearing engagement, incapacitated a trained killer, and performed a highly invasive battlefield medical procedure, all in the span of 3 minutes. Heavy footfalls echoed down the hallway. The Portland Police SWAT team, heavily armored and carrying assault rifles, swarmed into the ICU, their tactical lights cutting through the smoke. The lead officer breached the room, sweeping his rifle across the carnage. He saw 2 unconscious mercenaries, a shattered room, an FBI agent covered in blood, and a lone, exhausted nurse holding a plastic IV bag. "Status?" the SWAT commander yelled, lowering his weapon at the bizarre scene. Trent didn't look at the tactical team. He kept his eyes locked firmly on Abigail Collins. "Status is secure, Captain," Trent called out, his voice filled with a profound, newfound reverence. "The Major has the situation under control." By 4 a.m., Portland General Hospital was a fortress. The flashing red and blue lights of over 30 police cruisers painted the rain-slicked asphalt outside in a chaotic strobe. The ER had been cordoned off, transformed from a medical triage center into a federal crime scene. Abby sat on the tailgate of an empty ambulance in the rear bay, a foil thermal blanket draped over her ruined scrubs. The biting Pacific Northwest wind whipped her loose hair around her face, but she didn't feel the cold. The adrenaline crash had finally arrived, leaving behind a profound, hollow exhaustion that settled deep into her bones. She watched as 2 armored SWAT transports rolled out of the bay, carrying the surviving mercenaries to a black site holding facility. Arthur, the chemist who held the key to dismantling a multi-billion-dollar domestic terror plot, had been airlifted via a heavily armed Black Hawk helicopter to a secure military hospital in Seattle. He was stable. He was going to live. Footsteps approached through the puddles. Special Agent Robert Trent emerged from the hospital doors, carrying 2 steaming styrofoam cups of terrible break-room coffee. His tactical vest was gone, revealing a dark shirt stained with the chemist's blood. "It's over," Trent said, handing her a cup and leaning against the ambulance bumper. The third man, the one from the ER doors, tried to slip out through the loading dock. Port Authority picked him up 3 blocks away. "They're all in custody." Abby took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, letting the heat radiate through her chest. "Will they talk?" "They won't have to," Trent replied, staring out at the rain. The chemist woke up briefly before the medevac. He gave us the access codes to Kenward Heavy Industries' off-site servers. "My cyber division is already downloading the manifests, the buyer ledgers, and the internal communications. The conspiracy goes all the way up to a 2-star general at the Pentagon, the same general who ordered the strike on your surgical tent in Syria." Abby closed her eyes. For 2 years, she had carried the ghosts of the 2 medics she had lost in the desert. She had buried her identity, her rank, and her purpose, believing the system was too corrupt to fight. Hearing that the architect of that betrayal was finally being dragged into the light brought a strange, heavy sense of closure. "So, we won," Abby whispered. "We did," Trent confirmed. He turned to look at her, his expression shifting from federal agent to something resembling professional awe. "The director of the FBI was briefed an hour ago. So was the Secretary of Defense. They know what happened in that ICU. They know you held the line." Trent reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, black Secure-Com phone, offering it to her. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the device, but not taking it. "That is a direct line to the director of the Joint Terrorism Task Force," Trent said, his voice deadly serious. "You're a ghost, Major Collins, but you don't have to be anymore. The DoD is willing to reinstate your commission, fully exonerate your file, and attach you to a new elite Tier 1 medical extraction unit. They need people who can operate in the gray zones, people who don't freeze when the protocol fails." Abby looked down at her hands. They were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the immense physical toll of saving 21 lives and neutralizing a hit squad in a single night. She thought about the adrenaline, the sharp, crystalline focus of combat, and the familiar weight of a weapon in her hand. A part of her craved it. The military had been her entire life. But then she looked back at the sliding glass doors of the emergency room. She saw Dr. Peterson, exhausted and pale, conferring with the remaining nursing staff, ensuring the transfer of the night's regular patients to neighboring hospitals. She saw Chloe Bennett, the junior nurse, sitting at the desk, looking shell-shocked but safe. She remembered the teenager whose heart she had manually pumped, the woman whose internal bleed she had caught, and the crushed industrial worker who was now breathing on his own upstairs. "I spent 10 years taking lives to save lives, Trent," Abby said softly, pulling the foil blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I dropped into war zones where the rules of engagement were written in blood. I was good at it, maybe the best." She met Trent's gaze, her gray eyes clear and resolute. "But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to choose who to destroy to complete the mission. Tonight, I just put people back together. I saved 20 innocent people who just went to work and got caught in the crossfire of someone else's war." Abby gently pushed the secure phone back toward Trent's chest. "Keep your task force, Agent Trent. Major Abigail Collins died in Syria. She's a ghost." Abby offered a tired, genuine smile, the first one Trent had seen all night. "But Nurse Collins has a shift on Thursday, and my ER is going to need a hell of a lot of cleaning up before then." Trent looked at the phone, then back at the remarkable woman sitting in front of him. He slowly slipped the device back into his pocket. He understood. Some warriors didn't need a battlefield to fight. They just needed a front line. And the emergency room of Portland General was exactly that. "Understood, Nurse Collins," Trent said, extending his hand. Abby took it, a firm, respectful shake between two veterans of different wars. As the dawn began to break over the Portland skyline, painting the heavy rain clouds in shades of bruised purple and gold, Abigail finally slid off the ambulance. She walked back toward the sliding glass doors of the hospital, ready to wash her hands, chart her patients, and go home. The story of Abigail Collins is a testament to the extraordinary resilience of those who operate in the shadows of society. It challenges the conventional perception of a hero. Sometimes, the most dangerous and capable individuals aren't wearing Kevlar vests or military fatigues, but blood-stained scrubs in the frantic, fluorescent-lit corridors of a city hospital. By blending high-stakes tactical espionage with raw, visceral medical trauma, the narrative explores the duality of a woman caught between two lives, the ruthless efficiency of a special operations commander, and the profound empathy of a trauma nurse. Ultimately, Abigail's choice to remain in the ER underscores a powerful reality. True courage isn't always found in returning to the battlefield, but in having the strength to stand ground and heal the brokenness of the world, one patient at a time.